We'll give everybody a moment or two to come in. We've got several still out in the foyer, so we'll try to give them an opportunity to make it on in. What number, Caleb? Number 780. He'll lead us in that song, and then after that, Brother Eddie Palmer will lead us in our prayer.
When with the Savior we enter the glory land, won't it be wonderful there? And in the troubles and cares of the story land, won't it be wonderful there? Won't it be wonderful there? Having no burdens to bear, joyously singing with heart bells all ringing, oh, won't it be wonderful there? There with the tempest will never be sweeping us, won't it be wonderful there? Sure that forever the Lord will be keeping us, won't it be wonderful there? Won't it be wonderful there? Having no burdens to bear, joyously singing with heart bells all ringing, oh, won't it be wonderful there?
Shall we pray together? Almighty and loving Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this another beautiful Lord's Day. Father, we're thankful for everything you've given us. We give thee praise, honor, and glory to thy high and holy name. Father, we thank thee for thy Son, for his willingness to come to earth, to set forth the plan of salvation, that we now have the hope of eternal life. Father, pray that thou be with us through this day, and this time, Father, pray that you'll be with us as we study from thy word. All this we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
If you will, go ahead and make sure I've got this right. Open your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 20. Our study in verse 9, Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 9. Each week as we prepare to study the book of Proverbs, I know that each of you are, because you're telling me after class that you're really enjoying looking at the things that Solomon has provided for us. There's some great lessons in it. And what we're going to do is try to read each of these, and then as we read them, then come back and to notice a little bit. Let's see if I can. Today, nothing is working the way I want it to. I guess it'd help if I turned it on. Okay, chapter 20 and verse 9. Who can say, I have made my heart clean, I am pure from my sin? What's Solomon talking about here? I'm going to get you talking to start with. What's he discussing? Okay. Well, notice the way he puts it in the terms of a question. Why do you ask it in the form of a question rather than making a statement? Paul will make a statement in Romans chapter 3, but here he is providing it in terms of a question. And I think there's even a little more than this in what Paul says in Romans 3. Who can say? Now, when you find that phrase, that is to focus our attention on, is there anybody who is in this condition who can make this kind of proclamation? Notice, I have made my heart clean. Now, how do you make something clean? Okay, you got to wash it. You got to cleanse it. But who takes credit for here? Look what I did. And when you start thinking about that makes a man have to start saying, can I cleanse myself? Can I do things? Let's take some passages of Scripture which I think are helpful here. Let's take 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 46, where it says, when they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and deliver them to the enemy, and they take them captive to the land of the enemy, far or near. Notice he says, when they sin against you, and then he puts as a parenthetical statement, there is no one who does not sin. That's the first time that you start reading about the fact that sin is a product of all mankind. Or let's go to Job chapter 25 and verse 4. And he said, how then can a man be righteous before God? Or how can a man be pure who is born of woman? Who is there who has this ability in himself to say, I'm pure, I'm holy, I'm righteous in and of myself? Then you take Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 20. And he says, for there's not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. And then you know Romans chapter 3 and verse 20, and then chapter 3 verse 23, and then verses 9 and 10. Verses 9 and 10 said, what then, are we better than they? Not at all. For we have previously charged that both Jews and Greeks, that they're all under sin. As it is written, there's none righteous, no, not one. And in verse 23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So sin is a common denominator among man. But you look at this passage, who can say, I have made my heart clean? There are some passages I think are applicable here, and that is 1 John chapter 1, and look at verse 8 and verse 10. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. Verse 10, if we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. When Solomon asked this question, he's trying to point out the fact that there's no one who does not sin, but also he is trying to point out that none of us have the capacity in and of ourselves to make ourselves clean. We have to depend upon God for that. So Solomon's question here is very important. Now, why might this in context be very important for Rehoboam? I know you guys got something you just want to say. Okay. Humble himself in the sight of the Lord. What do rulers tend to generally think about themselves? They think, I answer to no one. I am the authority. I am the person who decides what's right and what is wrong. When that's incorrect. It is God who decides what's right and wrong. Man, regardless of what position he has in life, has no ability whatsoever to make himself clean. He's dependent upon God for all of this. And again, there will be several other passages we will look at as we get later that bring out this idea also as well. Anybody else want to add something to it? I've got several passages we can look at today, but I'm going to move along unless you've got something else. Okay, let's look at verse 10. Diverse weights and diverse measures, they are both alike an abomination to the Lord. We looked at this back in chapter 11 and verse 1. We also looked at it, or will look at it in chapter 20 and verse 23. What are diverse weights and diverse measures? Okay. 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 Really, simplified it real simple up here. It's cheating. I mean, that's really the bottom line. It's cheating. And scales, once upon a time, were not the kind of things that have little digital numbers on them. You had a weight on one side and a weight on the other side, and that's the way you would be able to determine whether or not how much something weighed. And if you had one set of weights that was a little bit lighter than they were supposed to be, and you had another a little bit heavier than they were supposed to be, one set of scales for buying and another set of scales for selling, you end up cheating a person, whether you're cheating them for the buying or you're cheating for the selling. But the diverse measures are as well. How many of you get frustrated when you go to the grocery store and buy this huge bag of potato chips? And then you open the bag, and how many's in there? About that bottom. I don't know that is by design. They say they do that to keep them fresh, to keep them from getting crushed, and I'll take their word for it. Yeah, you're buying it. There is a mental thing, though. If you see a huge package, and then you see, small amount, when you get it out, there is that difficulty with it. But here he's talking about a diverse weights and a diverse measures. They are both alike an abomination to the Lord. God hates. It's disgusting to him. That's what an abomination is. People who cheat others in what they're doing. Chapter 16 and verse 11 says, and I'll write that on there in case you're writing in the margin of your Bibles. He said, honest weights and scales are of the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. So if you're honest, you're serving God. If you're using perverted ones, then you are an abomination to the Lord. I know we're going to get some discussion on verse 11. Even a child is known by his deeds, whether what he does is pure and right. Now, are children fully responsible? No, they don't always understand what they're doing. But it says here that a child, even a child, is known by his deeds. I can't use some illustrations of particular people because I don't want to make somebody or some grandma mad. But have y'all ever seen some kids that are as mean as a snake? None of y'all's grandkids, by the way, but but have you ever seen some of them that you wonder if they're going to be in the penitentiary by the time they're an adult? Do you know children? And on the other hand, are there some of these children that will come up to you and say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and show a great amount of respect? It's all in the upbringing. Well, it says here, there's some here that are known by their deeds, where they does what is good and right. And parents need to realize their children, they are shaping them the way that they want them to be. And by doing that shaping, they are a reflection of their parenting skills. Would y'all agree with that? That children are a reflection of parenting skills? Okay, now how many of you have ever been embarrassed by your children? When I'm reading through this, sometimes I'm thinking, Solomon is really making me feel bad sometimes. Because many of us have, you want your children to be good, you want them to be respectful, you want them to bring honor to your name. But I think there's another idea that's in this, and that is that children, though they may not be fully responsible at this point, there is a standard of morality that applies even to children. Right and wrong, good and evil. And at some point, children pass the stage of innocence. And it'd be very easy for us to want to say, okay, here at 11 years of age, they're not responsible. At 12 years of age, they are responsible. Generally, what you find is children mature in different areas at different levels, and different children mature at different times in their lives as well. But there is a sense in which there is a point of morality or innocence in children, but at some point they know better. And I would say that by the time I was probably 6 or 7 years old, I knew better than to talk back. At least I'm alive. I'm still alive today. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it." That's a maxim, not 100% true, but most of the time is true. And then also, chapter 22 and verse 15 says, "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him." Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. You have to train. What happens if you leave a child to himself? He's going to get involved in everything. Well, I tried to think of a good illustration of this. In Genesis chapter 21 and verse 9, "And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, who had born to Abraham, scoffing." He was making fun of Isaac. Did Ishmael develop a reputation even young in life as a teenager? He did. Because he looked at Isaac and he would scoff and make fun of him. And that's what ended up causing Hagar and Ishmael to be cast out of the house, is because of that. So a child is even known by his deeds, whether what he does is pure and right. Anybody else want to comment on that one? Okay, let's go to verse 12. "The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord made them both." Now, how do you acquire knowledge? Okay. It's generally by the two main things he talks about here: the hearing ear and the seeing eye. There are things that you learn by taste. There's things that you learn by smell. There are things that you learn by touch. But generally, knowledge comes by sight and by sound. And he says the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. What does that mean? Okay, he imparts knowledge. Let me offer some passages I think may be helpful here. Let's go to Psalms chapter 94 and verse 9. "He who planted the ear, shall he not hear? And he who formed the eye, shall he not see? Does God know the way man works?" Sure he does. He knows the way you work. He knows the way that life takes place. And he says here, the Lord made them both. So he knows how to communicate to man in the most effective way. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 4 says, "Yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, as it is this very day." He said, some of you, the Lord has tried to help you, but you're not willing to listen, and you're not willing to look. You're not willing to observe everything God has done for you. And because of that, you are where you are. And so I think as we look at this passage, we ought to think about it. God has made them both. God has made that as a means of communication, and we ought to appreciate that as well. Verse 13. Do not love sleep, lest you come to poverty. Open your eyes, and you will be satisfied with bread. Do not love sleep. Is sleep not necessary? Every man needs time to sleep. You remember Mark 6 and verse 31? The disciples have been so busy, and the Lord says, come apart and rest a while. Give some time for some relaxation. Sleep is good. In chapter 3 and verse 24, he says, when you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. How many of us like a really good night's sleep? As I get older, I'm beginning to wonder if I'll ever find that again. He's talking about here sleep, but he says, do not love sleep. So what's he talking about? Laziness. Anything can be overdone, can it not? Even something good can be overdone. And let me offer a little observation here. If you go to chapter 6 and verses 9 through 11, he said, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep? So your poverty shall come upon you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Then chapter 19 and verse 15. Loveless cat into deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. So what he's talking about here is not just sleep, but he's talking about a type of sleep that results in a person not working, and he says that will bring you to poverty. A person who will all the time be sleeping, laying up in the bed. I get really annoyed with a lot of what goes on in our society today. Is there are people who, when you try to tell them, come to the building early, well, I guess maybe I can be there about noon. Why? I don't get up that early. And you say, well, that's maybe why you're in need. There's things such as that. But he says, open your eyes. Now, that really drags me back to verse 12. And what does he say in verse 12? Look it and see. God made the seeing eye and the hearing ear. And he says, open your eyes. Does God expect man to look and learn from the way things work in life? Yes, he does. He said, if you do that, you'll be satisfied with bread. You look around, and I was talking to a gentleman the other day, or maybe it's a person yesterday, made the comment, they were raised to work and work hard. And she was talking about, she said, this lady, she said that, in our home, that if the job you had didn't make enough money, you went out and got another job and worked a second job. Because you don't look at somebody else and say, take care of me. You say, what do I need to do to take care of me and my family? And maybe help somebody else who's in need. That's a real important biblical concept there. And then you got one additional principle, and that is several of the New Testament passages emphasize the importance of work. Romans 13, verse 11, 1 Corinthians 15, 34, Ephesians 5, verse 14. We could give you a whole lot of other passages, but I think everybody gets the idea of what he's saying here. Verse 14. It is good for nothing, cries the buyer, but when he's gone his way, then he boasts. Now, this is just like earlier when he talks about diverse weights and a diverse measure. There are techniques that people use to try to take advantage of someone else. And what does he say here?
The buyer always talks down to the
Sure. The buyer talks it down. He's like, Coretta can tell you the TV shows I like to watch are building shows, car shows, and where they there's a restoration. They'll go and they'll find a car in a junkyard, and what they'll do, they'll say, okay, now, it needs this, it needs that, and they begin to talk about all the things that makes it worthless, and to convince the person, well, maybe what I've got is not worth much. I know I've used this illustration before, but a few years ago, we were thinking about buying a new car. And we drove by, and we saw a nice, beautiful minivan. And so when we went in, we drove the vehicle, came back out, and the guy looked at our car, and he offered us, he said, I'll trade with you and it was a lot of money. And I said, well, thank you, I appreciate your time. He said, oh, no, hold on. I said, no, you like your vehicle a whole lot more than I do. I like my vehicle a whole lot more than you do, so I'm going to keep mine, I'll let you keep yours. And, I guess I was being a little smart with that, saying that, but the truth is, he was trying to tell me everything that he didn't like about my car. And I was thinking, well, if you don't like it that bad, then don't trade for it. If you can't, appreciate, but that's what he has here. It's good for nothing, says the buyer. But notice afterwards, but when he has gone his way, then what does he do? He boasts. He says, look, I took advantage of them. This is just like the diverse weights and diverse measures. This is about cheating. Oh, sure. It's now a very valuable piece of machinery. But, okay, let's go to verse 15 now. This is, I had some other passages which I thought might be helpful, but, let me go back. I think interesting, there's some passages in the Bible that are valuable. Hebrews 12, verse 16. Lest there be any profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. What was Jacob capable of doing with Esau with regards to that stew? He had this savory stew. Smell it, it's good. What good's that birthright to you if you die? If you die of hunger here, what good's it going to be to you? Did Esau feel taken advantage of? Yeah. And so there's a lot to that, and that's also found in Genesis chapter 25, verses 29 through 34. Okay, let's go to verse 15 now. There is gold and a multitude of rubies, but the lips of knowledge are a precious jewel. Now, I think this tends to go with verse 14 because it talks about the value of things. And then I think about what Satan did with Eve. I'll think about that for just a moment. What did Satan do with Eve with regards to the food that was before her and God's statement that they would surely die? Not. But think about the consequences of sin. What did Satan do about the consequences of sin? He belittled it. In other words, he devalued that. What did he place upon the food? It was delight to the eyes. It would be desired to make one wise. In fact, the only reason why God doesn't want you to eat this food is just because you'll be wise, knowing good and evil like him. You can be just as intelligent and just as smart as God, will you? Oh, I thought you was going to raise your hand. Okay. But the devaluing of certain things with the increase of value of others. And so when you look here, he says there is gold, there's rubies. Those are precious minerals and precious jewels. And he's trying to say, but the lips of knowledge, that's a precious jewel. That's where real value can be found. There's several passages which I like with regards to this. Chapter 3, in verses 14 and 15, he said, for her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things which you desire cannot be compared with her, talking about wisdom. In chapter 8 and verse 11, he keeps on and says, for wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that one may desire cannot be compared with her. Chapter 19 and verse 1 says, better is the poor who walks with his integrity than one who is perverse, though he is a fool. And then chapter 16 and verse 8, he said, better is a little with righteousness and vast revenues without justice. Solomon keeps addressing this idea of what things are of the most value and most importance. And for many of us, we don't really appreciate the fact that there's some things that are much more valuable than others. And in this case, he's talking about the lips of knowledge. Someone who will tell you the truth, someone who knows what they're talking about, their speech is more valuable than real precious metals or precious gems.
Solomon was also unique in that he had both that could accurately compare the two.
That's great. Really pointed out, Solomon had both of them, so he knew which was the more valuable. In fact, that's really what the book of Ecclesiastes is all about. He says, okay, now I'm going to step back and look at everything I've got and tell you what's worth something. And he says, if it comes to money, if it comes to knowledge, or wisdom, and it comes to all this, he said, you want me to tell you what's the most important thing? Chapter 12, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. This is what it's all about. That's where you should be when you end life. So verse 15 has a great lesson in it. Okay, let's go to verse 16. Take the garment of one who is a surety for a stranger, and hold it as a pledge when it is for a seductress. Now, there's a couple of things in this one. What about collateral? I mentioned it in my sermon this morning. What kind of things would people use as collateral? Clothing. Now, why do you think clothing would be used as collateral? Okay, clothing used to be very expensive. You know, it wasn't as if you could go to your closet and say, no, that's from the 70s, and that's from the 80s, and that's from the 90s, and, you know, I don't like this anymore, this doesn't fit anymore. Generally, a person would have one or two sets of clothing, and that would be just about it. And what you had to repair, you had to fix, to mend your garments. We have so much today, but here's a man who has a garment, and it says, you should take the garment. But if you go back to Numbers chapter 22, or Exodus 22, verses 26 and 27, he says, you don't take the man's cloak and keep it. And then he talks about you hold it as a pledge. Well, that's not something you're supposed to hold on to. Well, then what's his point in this passage? For a stranger, and for when it is for a seductress. Who is a stranger? What's that? A foreigner?
You don't know their reputation, whether they'll be good for what it is they're pledging.
Yes. Notice it's about one who is a surety for a stranger. You know, I think after several years, I have become a pretty good judge of character. When people come in and ask for benevolent help, I would not feel like I knew what I was, dealing with. Pretty well now, it doesn't take long. You just let people talk long enough, and they'll usually tell on themselves. So you ask them several questions, let them talk, and then pretty soon they'll tell you something that makes you see they're really in need or they're not really in need. But several years ago, when we were living in Clarksville, there was a man who came by and he says, I am in terrible need. I ended up on this little old road out here because we live in the middle of nowhere. And he said, but I always taught if you in need, go to the church. The church will take care of you. And he told me about, he said, I used to hear Brother Gus Nichols preach and, talked about some of his lessons and stuff. And I said, well, I happen to be from the part of Alabama where Brother Nichols was from. And I actually have family that was connected to Brother Nichols. Oh, yeah, I know this brother. And he knew all the names. And so I'm thinking, this guy is legitimate. I called the elders, and they said, yeah, go ahead and go out to the store and, get him some gas and get him some food and stuff like that. And so the little market that was at the end of the street there, it's called Woodlawn Market. The owner of it, we used to trade with him a lot, so he called and he said, this guy here, you told him to get $25 worth of gas. He says, he only wants $5 worth of gas because that's all his car will hold. And he wants the other in cash. He said, I didn't give it to him. And he said, I didn't think y'all would want to. I said, no, if he's, he was just out of gas, but if his car only holds $5 worth, he must have an awful small gas tank. And I apologized to the elders about that. Told them, I said, I'm sorry I got took. But when you have a stranger passing through that you don't know who he is, you don't know where he's from, and then you say, I'm going to be a surety for him. I'm going to be the one guarantee him. How can you guarantee for that person? You can't be a guarantee for them because you don't know them. But he says, go ahead and take the garment for that person who's going to be the surety. If he's that dumb, I hate to use that word, but if he's that lacking of judgment, but then the last part of that is even worse. When it is for a seductress. If a man's going to visit a brothel and he says, I need to borrow some money to go to the brothel, what do you say to him? First of all, you're not going to get it. But if you're going to take his garment, then just go ahead and keep it. Stanley?
Years ago, we were attended out at Afterward on number 30. One Sunday morning, there was some fellow, I don't have any idea who he was now. He came through and asked the elders for money. He said his mother lived in New York. He was on his way up there to see her before she passed on. And I was told later that he had hit several churches up here in the county. You may have, I don't know, remember this. But anyhow, the next day or two, I had to be down at one of the doctors in Nashville, and I was going up Broad. And stopped at a light up there and just happened to look over. Now, this was an old Cadillac. Opry stars, pictures all over it, it was rough looking. I looked over, he pulled up beside me. I saw who it was. It was him. I recognized him in the car too. So evidently he was a con artist. I just kind of take it that he was. His mother, she may have lived in New York, I don't know, but he was out trying to gather up some money for some reason.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that there are people here. But he's not just talking about helping a stranger. We're supposed to help the stranger. But he talks about man being a what? A surety for a stranger. Here's a man who's going to borrow you something of significant value, and you're going to give it to him, or you're going to stand in for him. That's the error of this. It's a lack of judgment is what this proverb is all about. Okay, let's go to verse 17. bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be filled with gravel. What's this one all about? Okay, what goes around comes around. When you're thinking about something here that's bread gained by deceit is sweet. A man who goes out and tricks somebody, just like the guy who's, says to the buyer, it's worth nothing, it's no good, and then he boasts afterwards. Here's a man who's actually been successful at cheating somebody. He's been good at it. How does he feel about it afterwards? It's sweet to him. Look what I did. Look who I got. Hey, I took the best of him. He says, but afterwards, his mouth is going to be filled with gravel. Now, that's not real pleasant. Do you suppose anyone else has ever experienced this? What about Genesis 3, verse 6? So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a pleasant to the eyes and desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and her husband took with her, and he ate. Do you suppose that Eve, after eating the forbidden fruit, said, it's not nearly as good as I thought it was going to be? She thought that it was good in the beginning. Proverbs chapter 9 and verses 17 and 18 says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of hell. The idea that you feel like, hey, look what I've accomplished. Look what I've done, but it's not going to succeed. The best illustration, I think, is found in Job chapter 20 and verses 12 through 15. Let me read it to you. Though evil is sweet in his mouth, and he hides it under his tongue, though he spares it and does not forsake it, but keeps it in his mouth, yet his food in his stomach shall turn sour. It becomes cobra venom within him. He swallows down riches and vomits them up. Again, God casts them out of his belly. The picture there is that a person who gets these wealth, these riches, by deceit, by means of ill-gotten gain, he thinks he's done real well, but how does it sit when it gets on his stomach? Turns sour. In fact, the illustration he uses is that of cobra venom. It burns. It is hurting all the way through. Now, what about the prodigal son? Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 15. When he got that inheritance from his father, what did he think about it? Woo-hoo, look, I've got all this money. I'm going to go live and party it up. What did he find afterwards, though? Yeah, he wound up slopping pigs. Hebrews 12, verse 15 and 16, talking about Esau. He wanted repentance, but he couldn't find it because he gave in too easy. Too much is based upon a person taking the short view that says, okay, I was successful in getting advantage over someone else. And he says, but in the long view, it's not that good. And Hebrews 11, verse 25, it says, by faith Moses, when he was of age, he refused to become called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing to share ill treatment with the people of God that enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. He understood what was the difference between them. And that's really what he's saying here, is look at the long view. If you're looking at the short view, it may appear to be good, but Afterwards, it will not. Okay, let's go to verse 18 now. Plans are established by the Lord, or by counsel, but wise counsel wage war. Let me read that again. Plans are established by counsel, by wise counsel wage war. This verse repeats what was found back in verse 6. And it emphasizes the importance of getting good, multiple-sourced advice. Plans are established by counsel. Good plans are. If you're going to build a house today, would it be valuable to go and talk with people who know what they're talking about building a house? Sure. And would be valuable to say, do we need as many square feet as we think we need? What kinds of materials should we be using? There's several things that should come into mind here. Well, he says they're established by counsel, but then the latter part of it says, by wise counsel, wage war. Now, that's important. Why is that so important? To whom is the book of Proverbs written? Initially, primarily. To Rehoboam, my son. And my son, I want you to understand, before you make decisions, you need to seek wise counsel. If our country here was going to go into war with another country, would it be good for our president to sit down with people who are able to see the big picture from several sides? Okay, let me give you one part of it. Luke chapter 14, verse 31. He says, or what king going to make war against another does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Are your 10,000 men as strong and capable as his 20,000 men? You know, the number is not always the key advantage. Sometimes it's the training of those men. But you got to sit down, you got to count that. Then you got to count the cost. Is it worth it? What if we're going to lose a whole bunch of lives? What is it going to cost us in terms of why are we fighting for this? What are we fighting for? All of those are things that a leader would need to be considering. And so he says, by wise counsel wage war. If you don't have good counsel, then maybe you ought not be doing this. Yes, took counsel, but he didn't take wise counsel. He didn't consider the intelligence of those people who were advising him. Okay, let's take verse 19, and then that's all we're going to be able to have time for in our class today. He who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with one who flatters with his lips. Now, Solomon has talked a lot about talebearers. What is a talebearer? A gossip. And what does a gossip do? He reveals secrets. Somebody told him something. Now, let me tell you this now. Don't you tell anybody else. That's a secret. But I'm going to tell you. He says, therefore, do not associate with one who flatters with his lips. There is an old maxim, it's not a biblical one. He who gossips to you will gossip about you. And the way that they get their dirt is they flatter with the lips. Well, I heard this. Is this true? I heard this about you. Well, I'm on your side. You've always made good decisions. Let me help you with this. Yeah, right. Where did you hear that? Oh, I can't tell that. They don't want me to tell that. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 13 says, A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals the matter. Chapter 18 and verse 8 says, the words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles. They go down to the innermost body. And so he's talking about how they hurt when they go deep and down into you. And then one final one is chapter 26 and verses 20 through 22. Where there's no wood, the fire goes out. Where there's no talebearer, strife ceases. As charcoal is to burning coals, and wood is to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles. They go down to the innermost body. Now, I think he's talking about there, if you don't have any wood, what happens? Fire goes out. What happens if you have a talebearer who has no tales? Contention, strife, and all that's going to cease. Well, Lord willing, next week, chapter 20.